An RS-28 Sarmat nuclear intercontinental ballistic missile exploded during a test in Russia. The incident occurred on September 21st. This was reported by an OSINT researcher with reference to satellite images from Planet Labs. The researcher published photos of the aftermath of a recent failed test of the Russian intercontinental missile RS-28 Sarmat at the Plesetsk test site. He posted the pictures on social networking site X, taken by the Maxmar satellite. The RS-28 Sarmat intercontinental ballistic missile is designed to launch nuclear warheads to hit targets thousands of miles away in the United States or Europe, but its development has been hampered by delays and test failures. The missile, according to the researchers, probably exploded while refueling at the test site, which is why NATO's Cobra Ball strategic reconnaissance aircraft ignored the explosion when it happened. As is clear, the RS-28 Sarmat test was a complete failure. The missile detonated in the mine, leaving a huge crater and destroying the test site. The Sarmat is a liquid-fueled missile, so this accident could have occurred separately from the actual launch. By all indications, this was a failed test that left a big hole in the ground, said Pavel Podvig, a Geneva-based analyst who runs the Russia Nuclear Forces project. There was a serious incident with the missile and the mine. Timothy Wright, a research fellow at the International Institute for Strategic Studies, IISS, in London, said the destruction of the area immediately surrounding the missile silo indicates a failure shortly after the ignition. One possible reason is that the first stage, upper stage, either failed to ignite properly or suffered a catastrophic mechanical failure, causing the missile to fall backwards or land close to the bunker and explode, he said. The RS-28 Sarmat is a fifth-generation Russian silo-based strategic missile system with a heavy multi-stage liquid intercontinental ballistic missile. The missile was developed by the Kyiv State Rocket Center, which specializes in the design of sea-based intercontinental ballistic missiles. The length of the missile is 35 meters, the launch weight is 208 tons, and the throwing weight is about 10 tons. The range of the missile is 16,000 kilometers. Russia has claimed that the Sarmat missile can deliver nuclear warheads to anywhere in the world. IISS analyst Wright said that the test failure does not necessarily mean that the Sarmat program is in jeopardy. However, this is the fourth consecutive failure of the Sarmat test, which will at least further push back its already delayed commissioning and at most raise questions about the program's viability, he said. The delays will put pressure on the performance and readiness of the outdated SS-18s that Sarmat is supposed to replace, as they will have to remain in service longer than expected. At the same time, Russian presidential spokesman Dmitry Peskov urged journalists not to overemphasize Russia's nuclear program and changes in this document when it comes to Russia's war against Ukraine. When asked to answer why Russia does not use its nuclear weapons against Ukraine after massive drone attacks on the territory of the Russian Federation, because when Vladimir Putin spoke about changes in the nuclear doctrine, he also mentioned drone attacks, Peskov advised Russian propagandists not to combine the nuclear doctrine and the so-called special military operation, which, according to him, continues as it should. And this comment by the press secretary of the President of the Russian Federation basically answers the question of who exactly Vladimir Putin's new nuclear threats were addressed to, not to Ukraine, but primarily to Ukraine's Western allies. The main task for Putin today is to keep Western leaders from making a decision on the possibility of Ukraine using Western-made missile weapons to strike the sovereign territory of the Russian Federation. As you know, in recent months, Ukraine has been demanding such permission, and discussions on this issue continue among representatives of the leading Western countries that are allies of Ukraine in its confrontation with Russian aggression. In London, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken and British Foreign Secretary David Lammy held talks on this issue. Subsequently, the foreign ministers of the United States and the United Kingdom traveled to Kyiv and held consultations with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and other representatives of the Ukrainian political leadership. The topic of possible authorization for the use of Western missile weapons to strike the territory of the Russian Federation was also an important part of the talks between US President Joseph Biden and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer in Washington, and of course the consultations between Joseph Biden and Volodymyr Zelensky during their meetings in the United States could not have been complete without a discussion on this topic. But this is not the end of the discussion. It is likely that the final decision on the format in which Ukraine will or will not receive permission to use Western missile weapons to strike the sovereign territory of the Russian Federation will be made during Joseph Biden's next trip to Germany. During the US President's summit with Federal Chancellor Olaf Scholz, French President Emmanuel Macron, and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. As you know, there will also be a meeting of leaders in the Ramstein format. This may also become an important part of this discussion, and, of course, Vladimir Putin would like to prevent this decision. That is why the main meaning of these changes in the nuclear doctrine is the message of the Russian president that if a nuclear power, say the United States, the United Kingdom, or France, provides a non-nuclear power with its weapons, even non-nuclear weapons, to strike the territory of the Russian Federation, Moscow will consider this nuclear power an accomplice in aggression against Moscow, and thus will be able to respond to this nuclear power even with the use of nuclear weapons. This is the meaning of this whole threat, not the listing of missiles or drones. Vladimir Putin hopes that Western politicians will simply fear not just further escalation of the situation on the Russian-Ukrainian direction, but a real nuclear war. All of this matters to Putin because he understands perfectly well that missile strikes on Russian warehouses and arsenals can significantly reduce the chances of the Russian Federation to conduct a long-term war of attrition against Ukraine. And then, there may indeed arise a dangerous possibility for the Russian president of holding peace talks with Ukraine that will not take place on Russia's terms. And the Russian president still hopes to bring Ukraine to capitulation to the Russian Federation during the long war of attrition to create conditions for the disappearance of the state he hates from the political map of the world. But you and I are well aware that if Putin does not have enough weapons to make this decision, if the Russian president is in danger of being shelled by missile technology on his own territory, this will, first of all, create a certain nervousness in Russian society. If Russian propagandists are already asking the press secretary of the president of the Russian Federation why their country does not use nuclear weapons against Ukraine, this is already a serious urbanization. Secondly, it will reduce the potential of the military-industrial complex of both the Russian Federation and those countries that are ready to supply Russia with weapons to continue the war. And thirdly, it would call into question Russia's own ability to wage war against Ukraine for the several years that Putin and his entourage apparently believe would be necessary to succeed in this war. That is why Putin is ready for any maneuvers to prevent new decisions by the West. And this does not mean that he is really considering the possibility of using nuclear weapons in a Russian-Ukrainian war. After all, the restrictions that exist on the use of these weapons from a political point of view have not disappeared. Putin cannot realize how the West will actually respond if this nuclear strike is actually launched against a non-nuclear state. What would be the position of such important allies of Moscow as China or India? That is why Russia will not use nuclear weapons. We also see that Russia itself cannot cope with its nuclear missiles. Even during tests, they fail before they even leave the silo. Putin only makes loud statements to create fear and show that his state is strong, but in fact, it is not. Vladimir Putin is pushing the red lines further and further away when he makes statements that he will use nuclear weapons. Thank you, friends. That's all for today. Subscribe to the channel to keep up with the latest developments. This video was prepared by Hustler. See you soon.